My mother said, "Your sister's family will always come first. You are always last." My father agreed. I answered, "Good to know." So I put myself first in my own life. Separate money, separate plans. Then a family emergency hit them. They expected me to pay. But what happened next left them frozen. I was sitting at the kitchen table when my mother's words landed. She hadn't even paused in her carving. I'd the knife slicing through the roast, like she was cutting through something much softer, something less important. "You'll always be second to Laya, sweetheart," she continued, as if she were commenting on the weather, not my life. My father, of course, just nodded. His agreement came as naturally as his breath. No questions. No hesitation. They were always in sync when it came to this quiet, unspoken ranking they'd established in our family. I didn't say anything. I just let the silence stretch between us, thick and suffocating, until I finally spoke, the words coming out with more calm than I felt. "Good to know." That was the moment. The moment I stopped waiting for a place at their table. The moment I stopped hoping for something more, something different. The moment I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, how much I accomplished, I would always be last. And so I made a decision. I pulled my money back, my time back, my plans back. Separate life, separate future. I wasn't angry. Not at first. Just numb. The kind of numb that settles into your bones when you realize something about yourself that you'd been denying for years. I had spent so much of my life trying to earn a place at the table, trying to prove myself worthy of their attention, their love, their praise. But it had never been enough. Laya, the golden child, always came first. And I had to learn to live with that. Or, more accurately, I had to learn to live without it. After that conversation, the space between my family and me began to feel cleaner. The quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was just empty. I could breathe easier in the silence. But then, of course, just as I started to enjoy my own company, my family came knocking. It wasn't long before the call came, a family emergency. They expected me to open the door and offer a solution, like I always had. And for a moment, I wondered if they thought I'd just dropped off the face of the earth, like I'd been living in a different world entirely. Maybe I had been. Maybe I was. But when they showed up at my door, all four of them standing there like it was a typical Sunday morning, I didn't feel the rush of duty I once would have. I didn't feel the tug of old habits, the reflex to save them, to fix everything they'd broken. All I felt was the weight of their expectation, and the cold certainty that they hadn't learned a damn thing. There had always been a quiet ranking system in our house. I'd learned to hear it in the subtle shifts in the way people moved, the way conversations would rise when someone important entered the room, and how they would thin out when I did. No one had to say it outright. The hierarchy was there, ingrained in every action, every decision. It was felt more than spoken. When Laya turned 16, the whole driveway had glowed. My parents had parked a new car under the streetlight, its paint catching every shimmer. They stood beside it waiting, ready to hand her the keys. I'd watched from the upstairs window, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my chest. My mother's voice, sharp with pride, cut through the air. "Your future is worth investing in," she'd said. 6 months later, on my 16th birthday, the kitchen light hummed softly over a small cake. No candles. No surprise waiting outside. Just my father sliding a simple card across the counter. "We're proud of you," it read, in printed letters. I smiled anyway. I knew the script. Laya got the spotlight. I got the quiet nod. Always last. College followed the same pattern. Laya received checks for tuition, for books, for the apartment near her campus. I got a lecture about responsibility. "You're independent," my mother said, as if it were a flaw I'd chosen. "You manage fine." So, I did. I stocked shelves in the early mornings. I wrote code for small freelance projects late into the night. I saved every dollar, counting each one, watching as it piled up. Slowly, until I could afford community college. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for anything more. But still, it was hard not to notice how differently my parents treated Laya. How easily they gave her everything. And how, no matter how hard I worked, I was always just a little out of the frame. Just a little bit to the side. That's the thing with families like mine. They don't need to say it outright. You just feel it in the spaces between words, in the way they look at you, in the way they place their expectations on you like a weight you're expected to carry without complaint. But no matter how hard you carry it, they never seem to notice. And I had been carrying it for years. The first time I realized how different everything was, I was 16, sitting at the kitchen table, while my mother handed Laya the car keys. They'd parked it right under the streetlight, where the new paint caught every shimmer of the moonlight, gleaming like something they'd just purchased for themselves. I could hear the words before they were spoken. "Your future is worth investing in," my mother said. Her voice, sharp with pride, echoed in the space between us, as if she were delivering a decree. I watched them both, standing together in that moment. Laya, the shining one, always the center of their attention. The second I saw the car, I felt it, the familiar, heavy weight of being the one who was always outside the circle. Laya's birthday had been a celebration. A grand gesture that no one had ever bothered to make for me. My own 16th birthday had passed with a small cake on the kitchen counter, a card with printed letters that simply said, "We're proud of you." I smiled, of course, but inside, I knew exactly where I stood. I had learned to expect nothing more. Laya was the one who got the spotlight. I got the quiet nod, the of course, acknowledgement. By the time I turned 18, I'd come to accept this unspoken truth about my place in the family. I didn't need the grand gestures, the applause. I had learned how to live without them. I worked hard, mostly because I had to. I didn't have a trust fund or a pile of cash waiting for me to swipe from. I worked at the grocery store before school, and late into the night, I learned how to write code. My mother would sometimes comment on how independent I was. Like it was a flaw I had chosen for myself. Something that made me somehow less than Laya, who didn't have to struggle for everything. But it was that very independence that saved me. I wasn't like Laya, who always had everything handed to her, who got the clothes, the experiences, the attention. I had my own space, my own life. And though I had no grandiose dreams of a fairy tale ending, I built something quietly, piece by piece. My own apartment, one I could afford with my own savings, a small place that felt like a victory every time I stepped through the door. I had money in the bank, enough to be comfortable, to breathe a little easier. The feeling of financial security was one I'd never known growing up. And yet, there were times, late at night, when the world outside was quiet, and my apartment was still, when I felt the absence of my family's approval. It wasn't that I wanted their approval anymore. It was more like I was trying to forget that I had ever needed it. I'd stand by the window, looking out at the world, and wonder if they even realized I was doing okay, or if they just assumed I had always been fine. But no one ever asked. No one ever checked in to see how I was really doing. Yulea had her wedding, her baby shower, her endless milestones, and my parents were there for all of them. For me, I crossed the stage at graduation alone. They were out of town that weekend, celebrating Leia's newest achievement. When I called afterward, my mother's response was as casual as it was predictable. "That's wonderful, honey," she'd said, but her voice was already distracted by whatever else was going on in the background. I hung up, alone, again. It was around this time that I started to feel something stir inside me. I had built this life, my life. A life that didn't depend on their approval or validation. I'd grown into my independence, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. There was no other choice. If I had waited around for them to notice, to recognize my accomplishments, I would still be waiting. I had spent years adjusting to the idea that I was invisible to them, that my role in the family was to be the constant supporter, the silent provider, the one who always showed up but never truly belonged. That was my place. And I had learned to accept it, or so I thought. Then the message came. A simple text from my mother. Family meeting Sunday. Important. No context. No asking if I was free. No real invitation. Just a statement, like it was an appointment. A meeting they'd scheduled without so much as a thought of whether I could make it. I felt that familiar pang in my chest. The familiar tightness in my stomach. The anticipation of another one of their problems that I would have to solve. But this time, I wasn't so sure I was willing to play the role they always expected of me. The role I had spent my entire life in. And as I sat down at my desk, the soft hum of the city outside my window, I wondered how long it would take for them to understand that I was no longer their go-to solution. How long it would take for them to see that I had built my own life, and that life didn't revolve around anymore. The weekend arrived sooner than I expected, and with it, the family meeting I hadn't asked for, hadn't agreed to, but knew deep down was inevitable. The house was quiet when I arrived. The kind of quiet that always made me feel like I was walking into something I didn't belong to. The air was heavy, tight with unspoken things. The living room was the same as always, familiar but distant, like it had been frozen in time. The same couch. The same recliners pulled too close to the coffee table. The same stack of papers, but today it wasn't just mail, it was something more serious. My parents sat across from each other, hands folded neatly in their laps, as if they had been rehearsing this moment. Leah sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her gaze fixed on the floor. Noah was standing by the window, avoiding eye contact, shifting from foot to foot, like a man trying to hide from the truth. It was my mother who broke the silence first, her voice calm but unmistakably stern. "There's been a situation," she said, without any preamble. "Leah and Noah are facing some financial strain." She paused as if she expected me to react, but I didn't. I just waited, the knot in my stomach tightening with every word. The mortgage is behind. Tuition isn't paid. There's a legal issue we don't have time to explain, but no, can't work for now. I looked at them all. They weren't asking me to help, not yet. But I could already feel it, hanging in the air, waiting to settle over me like a burden I'd carried before. My father finally spoke, his voice as flat as always. "We've done the math," he said, tapping the stack of bills on the coffee table. "We can cover part of it, but not all." His eyes flickered to me, and there it was, the familiar look, the unspoken expectation. "Leah needs immediate help." The words hung in the air. I didn't speak. I didn't even blink. I let the silence stretch between us, waiting for it. Waiting for them to make their demand. It didn't take long. My mother leaned forward, her fingers digging into the fabric of the couch, her eyes locking onto mine. "We expect you to take care of the rest. You're single. You have a stable job. You don't have the same expenses. It just makes sense." My heart dropped into my stomach. The weight of the words crushed me, but I didn't show it. I didn't react. Not yet. Not the way they wanted me to. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to tell them that I was tired of always being the one to fix things. Tired of being the silent one. The one who was expected to hold everything together while they lived their lives without any real understanding of what I had sacrificed. But I didn't. I just sat there, the numbness creeping back in. Leah finally spoke, her voice soft but desperate. "We really need you, Karenza." She said my name like it was a plea, a fragile thread holding her together. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make me forget everything I had already given, everything I had already lost. I looked at the papers in front of me. They were all there, the breakdown of the mortgage, the tuition bills, the legal fees. The numbers didn't lie. And I could see it clearly now, they didn't need me to help. They needed me to fix everything for them, to erase the consequences of their own actions. They needed me to sacrifice again. To carry their weight because they never learned to carry their own. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just stared at the numbers on the paper, the harsh reality of it all sinking in. They expected me to pay. They thought I would help because that was what I had always done. Stepped in when no one else would. Picked up the pieces when they fell apart. But this time I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just looked at them all, the silence between us growing thicker with each passing second. Finally, I spoke. "I'll need 24 hours, I said, my voice calm, cold. The words hung in the air for a moment before my mother nodded, as if she were expecting me to comply without question. "Of course," she said. "We'll sort it out tomorrow." I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me, their eyes following me as I turned to leave. But there was something different now. Something had shifted. I wasn't the one who needed to fix this. Not anymore. The drive home was quieter than I had expected. No music, no distractions, just the hum of my old car and the thoughts swirling in my mind. I kept replaying my mother's words, the calm certainty in her voice. And I realized something: she expected me to fix it. She expected me to be the one to carry them, as I always had. But I wasn't sure I was willing to anymore. When I got home, I sat down at my desk, the quiet of my apartment wrapping around me like a shield. I looked at the numbers again, the mortgage, the tuition, the legal fees, and I knew what I had to do. If I was going to help, it would be on my terms. I wasn't going to fix their problems without fixing the mess they had made in me. I wasn't going to keep playing the role of the silent, invisible one who did everything for them and got nothing in return. I opened my laptop, and for the first time in my life, I felt the strange sensation of relief. The pressure, the weight, the years of expectation, they all began to lift as I started to type. The next day, I didn't call them. I didn't text or send any signals that I had already made up my mind. Instead, I sat in my apartment, the silence stretching around me, my laptop open in front of me. I had never been more certain of what I had to do. The sun was setting, casting a soft glow over my living room. The world outside was quieter than usual, and the distant hum of traffic a steady reminder that life was continuing, without me. I hadn't heard from my family since our meeting the day before, and part of me wondered if they thought I had just been waiting to rush in and solve their problems. Maybe they thought I would fold. After all, I always had before. But not this time. This time, I was prepared. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway outside, but they didn't belong to anyone who mattered. It was a sound I had grown used to, the kind of noise that felt like it belonged to someone else's world, not mine. The silence in my apartment felt different now. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the absence of the old expectations. For years, I had carried the weight of everyone else's problems without question. I had been the one to clean up the messes they left behind, the one who silently carried the burden of their choices. And, all along, I had done it, because I thought it was what I had to do. I had convinced myself that my place in the family was to be the savior, the one who would always make things right. But now, sitting in my chair, looking at the numbers in front of me, I saw something I hadn't before. I wasn't the one who had broken things. I wasn't the one who had left things to fall apart. I had learned to live with what they had left me, but I wasn't the one who had created this mess. The numbers on the screen were simple, clear. They weren't complicated, not like the way my family had made things. They didn't demand sacrifices. They just showed the truth of the situation. Mortgage payments, school tuition, legal fees. I knew how to calculate these things, how to break them down, how to manage them. I had learned all of this on my own, and it wasn't because I wanted to. It was because I had to. I looked at the breakdown of their finances. It was staggering. I had heard them talk about it in that meeting, how they were in trouble, how they needed help, how they expected me to save them. They thought they could lean on me, like they always had. But now, it was my turn to decide. I wasn't going to be the one who sacrificed everything for them anymore. They had never asked if I could afford to help. They had never asked what I needed. It had always been about them, about their needs, their crises, their problems. It was never about me, not once. I took a deep breath and opened a new file. I started typing, each word feeling more empowering than the last. I wasn't going to help them blindly. I wasn't going to be the one who gave up everything just to fix their mistakes. I needed to protect myself. I had spent my entire life putting their needs first, and it had only made me invisible. It had only pushed me to the edge, while they sat in the center, demanding more and more. I began to craft a document, The terms of the help I would provide, if I provided any at all. It wasn't just going to be about money. It was going to be about setting boundaries, about demanding respect, about making it clear that I wasn't just a silent bystander anymore. I wasn't going to be the one who got nothing in return. They needed to understand that my help wouldn't come without cost. I drafted the terms carefully, methodically. The mortgage catch-up, tuition payment, and legal retainer would all be covered, but they would have to repay me, with interest. I included clauses for financial counseling, because I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about understanding how they had come to expect so much from me, and learning how to manage their own lives. I wasn't going to be their safety net anymore. They needed to stand on their own 2 feet. Then came the hardest part, the family therapy. I added a section about mandatory therapy, not as punishment, but as a way to understand the dynamics that had brought us here. They needed to acknowledge how they had treated me all these years, how they had taken me for granted, how they had forced me into this role I never wanted. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the years of emotional neglect, the years of being overlooked. I paused for a moment, reading through the document again. Each word felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I had spent so long carrying their burdens, trying to fix everything, trying to be the person they wanted me to be. But now, I was finally speaking up. I was setting the terms. I was taking control of my life. The clock ticked quietly in the background, the only sound in the room. I could feel the pressure of the past years pressing against me, but now it felt different. I wasn't the one being crushed anymore. I wasn't the one who had to bend to their will. I was finally standing up for myself. I saved the document and printed it out. I placed it neatly in a folder, the clean, crisp paper a symbol of everything I had put in place. This wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about fairness, about establishing boundaries, about demanding the respect I had never been given. When I closed my laptop, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. I wasn't hoping for something that would never come. I had taken control. I had put myself first. And now? It was time to show them that I wasn't the one who was going to fix everything for them anymore. It was their turn to face the consequences of their actions. The next morning, I felt a strange calm. The usual chaos in my mind had cleared, replaced by a quiet certainty. I'd spent the whole night preparing the document. I had laid everything out, carefully, with precision. It wasn't just a loan agreement, it was a boundary. It was a statement. It was a way to finally take control of a life I had spent years trying to manage, trying to make fit in their mold. The sun streamed through my blinds, casting long shadows across the floor, and for a moment, I almost felt like I could breathe freely. I wasn't holding my breath anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone else to validate me, or to take responsibility for the choices they had made. When the clock struck 12, I knew it was time. I grabbed the folder I had carefully prepared, the paper crisp in my hands, and walked out of my apartment. My car hummed softly as I drove, the streets outside unfamiliar in their quiet normalcy. Like everything in the world was still turning, while I was about to turn my own world upside down. I thought of the meeting that awaited me. The familiar faces, the same setting. Nothing had changed on the outside, but everything had changed for me. The drive was short, but it felt long. I kept my hands tightly gripping the steering wheel, the folder in my lap. My thoughts were all over the place. Was I doing the right thing? Was I really prepared for the fallout that was coming? The truth was, I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing: I had no choice now. I couldn't go back. When I pulled into the driveway, I felt the same sense of dread I always did when I visited this house. It was never a place where I felt like I belonged. It was just a place where I had to show up, to play my part. But not anymore. Not today. I parked my car and sat there for a moment, letting the silence of the afternoon settle in. Then, taking a deep breath, I grabbed the folder and walked up to the front door. My hand hovered over the doorbell for a moment, then I rang it. The sound echoed through the empty space, and for the first time, it felt like I was the one in control. My mother answered the door, her face brightening when she saw me. "Good you're here," she said, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and walked past her, into the living room where my father was already seated. Laya and Noah were there, too. Laya sat on the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes avoiding mine. Noah stood by the window, his arms crossed, looking out at the garden as if he could escape whatever was coming. The room was tense, the kind of tension that you could almost feel in the air, like it was pressing down on everyone. My mother sat down in the recliner, and my father followed suit, both of them facing me. It felt like a showdown, but this time, I wasn't the one who was about to cave. I placed the folder on the coffee table in front of me, the papers inside crinkling as I set it down. It was a small, deliberate motion, but it felt like the loudest thing in the room. My mother's eyes flicked to it, then back to me, her gaze narrowing as she waited for me to speak. I didn't waste any time. "This is what I'm offering," I said, my voice calm, steady. "I'm willing to help you, but on my terms." My mother's face tightened, but she didn't interrupt. My father shifted in his seat, and I could see him trying to process what was happening. Leia looked up at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. Noah, too, looked taken aback. But they all stayed silent, waiting for me to continue. I opened the folder slowly, pulling out the first page. The mortgage catch-up, tuition payment, legal retainer, those things will be covered. But you will repay me with interest. I looked at my mother first, then my father. "I've been paying for your mistakes for years. This time, it's on your terms, not mine." My mother's lips tightened, and she shifted in her seat. "That's not..." She stopped herself, realizing there was no point in arguing. I turned the page. "There will be financial counseling. It's mandatory, and there will be family therapy. You've all taken me for granted for too long. It's time for you to understand why that's not okay." The room went quiet. I could feel the weight of their stares on me, but I held my ground. I wasn't here to beg them for approval. I wasn't here to be their savior anymore. I placed the final document on the table, my fingers lightly brushing over the words. "And finally, there will be public acknowledgement. At the next family gathering, you'll address the favoritism. You'll acknowledge the years I've spent living in your shadow, always last, always second, and you'll apologize." I sat back, folding my hands in my lap. I wasn't angry, not yet. But I was sure. I was finally sure of who I was, and who I wasn't. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at the papers, then back at me. My father sat still, his face unreadable. Laya looked like she might cry, but she didn't speak either. Noah's eyes darted around the room, uncertain. I didn't rush them. I let the silence sit between us, thick and heavy, like it had been waiting for this moment all along. This is what it costs to be part of this family. If you agree to these terms, I'll help. If not, I'm done. The room felt colder, the air thicker. I waited, knowing that this was the moment. The moment they would realize that I wasn't the same person who had walked into this house all those years ago. The person they could lean on, the one they could take for granted. I was done being that person. And they knew it. The silence stretched out in front of me, heavier than it had ever been. I could feel the weight of it in the air, thick and suffocating, as if the very room was holding its breath, waiting for someone to speak. But no one did. I sat back in the chair, folding my hands in my lap, and watched them process the documents in front of them. My mother's fingers trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. My father's eyes scanned the terms carefully, pausing at each section, as if trying to understand what he was reading. Leia didn't say a word, her face pale, her eyes wide, like she was seeing me for the first time. Noah shifted on his feet, his brow furrowed, his lips pressed into a thin line. For years, I had been the one to do everything for them. To quietly absorb their expectations, their demands, their emotional weight. I had done it because I thought that was my place. But now, as I sat there watching them, I realized how much I had allowed them to take. I'd given them my time, my energy, My resources without question, without hesitation. And it had never been enough. Corenza. My mother's voice broke through the silence, soft but sharp. She was the first to speak, but her words were hesitant, uncertain. This isn't how we've done things. I didn't flinch. I didn't even move. I simply looked at her, my expression neutral. No, this isn't how you've done things. But it's how things will be now. I let my words hang in the air for a moment, letting them sink in. I'm not going to keep paying for your mistakes. I'm not going to be the one who saves you every time. My father cleared his throat, but he didn't look up from the papers. We didn't ask you to. You didn't have to. I interrupted, my voice steady. You've been asking me to do it for years, and I've never said no. But I'm done. This time, you'll have to do it on your own. The room felt colder now, the tension palpable. My mother's face reddened, but she didn't argue. Leia's eyes were filled with something I couldn't place. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Noah still hadn't spoken, but I could tell he was angry. I didn't care. They had no idea how angry I had been all these years. How much I had swallowed just to keep the peace. Just to make sure they didn't notice that I was disappearing. I glanced at the terms again. The mortgage, tuition, legal fees, all of it will be paid. But you'll pay me back. I'll help you, but I won't sacrifice my life for yours anymore. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over them. You've never asked if I could afford it. You've never asked what I've needed. But that changes now. My father's hand slid across the table, his fingers lightly grazing the papers, as if searching for something. We always thought. His voice faltered, and for the first time in a long while, he seemed unsure of himself. You always thought I would say yes. I finished for him. And I did. Every time. But I'm not your backup plan anymore. There was a long pause. The room seemed to hold its breath, each of them processing what I had said, what I was offering, but they didn't get it, not yet. I knew they wouldn't. They couldn't. For so long they had assumed I would always be there, that I would always step in and make everything right. They hadn't seen me. Not really. Leia's voice trembled as she spoke. Corenza, we need you. You're the only one who can. No, I said, cutting her off. You're the ones who need to learn how to do it on your own. You've been relying on me for too long, and I've been letting you. It ends now. I could see the shock in their eyes, but I didn't feel sorry. I wasn't the one who had created this situation. I wasn't the one who had forced me into this role. I wasn't the one who had expected my life to be about their convenience, their problems, their needs. I had allowed it for far too long, but no more. My mother's gaze shifted, a flicker of something crossing her face, regret. Maybe. But she quickly masked it, turning her attention back to the papers. Her hands were still shaking, but now it was less from disbelief and more from something else. Something she wasn't ready to confront. I didn't wait for them to respond. I didn't need to hear them plead. I wasn't going to change my mind. You have 24 hours, I said, standing up, the finality in my words leaving no room for negotiation. If you want my help, you'll agree to the terms. If not, I walk away. I'm not going to carry this anymore. I turned and walked toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. But not with fear. No, this was different. This was strength. I had never felt more sure of anything in my life. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I wasn't waiting for their permission. When I stepped outside, the cool air hit me, sharp and refreshing. It felt like a new beginning, like I had just shed a skin I didn't need anymore. I got into my car, the engine humming to life beneath me. I drove away without looking back, the road ahead clear, the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders with each mile. I wasn't going to fix their problems anymore. This time, they would have to face the consequences of their choices. And I was going to live my life on my own terms. The 24 hours passed slowly, each minute stretching on like an eternity. I didn't hear from them, not a single call, not even a text. I half expected it, I guess, and yet, a part of me had been waiting for some sign that they understood. That they would somehow meet me halfway, recognize what I had done for them, and appreciate it. But the silence only deepened the certainty. I had felt the day before. This was their crisis, not mine, and I wasn't going to be the one to fix it. When the second day rolled around, I woke to a phone call. It was from my mother. Her voice was shaky, almost apologetic. But there was a sharp edge to it. Too, like she had spent the night rehearsing the words she would say to me. "Corenza," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "We've talked it over, and we agreed to the terms." There was a pause. "But this is hard, you know. We've never done anything like this." I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to her voice as it faded out, replaced by the sounds of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. They had agreed, but I wasn't sure if they understood the gravity of what that agreement meant. It wasn't just about the money. It was about acknowledging years of unspoken expectations. It was about finally seeing me as something more than a backup plan, a safety net. I wasn't sure if they were capable of seeing that. "I understand," I said, my voice steady, despite the mix of emotions swirling inside me. "I'll send over the documents so you can sign them. The sooner it's done, the better." There was a moment of silence, then my mother spoke again. "Thank you, Corenza. We're really sorry it had to come to this." I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say. Sorry wasn't enough. It never had been. But I didn't say that. Instead, I simply said, "Good, I'll see you soon," and hung up the phone. I sat there for a few moments, the weight of it all settling on me. They had agreed, but it felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. What would change? Would they truly respect the terms I had set? Or would they slip back into old habits, expecting me to take on the emotional and financial burdens of their mistakes? The drive to their house felt different this time. It wasn't just a drive to a family gathering or another Sunday afternoon. It felt like a journey to a turning point. I wasn't sure what to expect when I arrived. But I knew one thing: things wouldn't be the same. I wasn't going to be the same. I parked in front of the house and sat for a moment before stepping out. The familiar smell of my parents' house hit me as soon as I opened the door. The scent of their old leather furniture, the faint smell of coffee in the air, the mustiness of the carpet beneath my feet. It all felt like a reminder of everything I had spent years trying to avoid. This was the place where I had learned to be invisible, where I had learned to hold my breath and wait for a place at the table that would never come. But not anymore. I walked inside, and there they were. My mother and father, seated in their usual spots. Laya, sitting uncomfortably on the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Noah stood near the window, his arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. My mother smiled at me, but it was thin-strained. "Corenza," she said softly, standing to greet me. "We're ready." I nodded, setting the folder on the coffee table in front of them. "Here it is," I said, my voice calm but with an undercurrent of something stronger beneath. "Sign it and we move forward. We don't. It's that simple." My father reached for the folder first, his hands unsteady as he flipped through the pages. He didn't say anything, but I could see the way his eyes darted across the words. Leia was the next to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Corenza, are you really going to do this? Make us sign a contract like we're strangers." I looked at her, her face full of confusion and a touch of hurt, but I wasn't moved. "Yes, Leia. I'm really going to do this. Because you've never asked me how I felt. You've never asked me if I was okay with any of this. You've never asked me if I was okay being your backup, your fallback. And I'm done being that." She didn't respond. She just looked away, her fingers nervously picking at the hem of her sleeve. My mother's eyes were fixed on the contract, the lines of her face tight with the weight of what was being asked of her. She had never been one to deal well with confrontation, especially when it came to me. "I don't want to do this," my father muttered, his voice low. "But if this is what it takes..." I waited. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I wasn't sure if they truly understood what this meant, or if they were simply agreeing, because they had no other choice. But either way, it was happening. They were going to sign the papers. They were going to finally see what it meant to treat me as an equal, not just as someone who could always be counted on to fix their mistakes. Finally, my father took the pen in his hand and signed the first page. My mother followed suit, her signature hesitant but firm. Leia looked at me, her face still pale, before she signed as well, her hand shaking slightly. The room was still. It was done. They had agreed, but I didn't feel the sense of triumph I had expected. Instead, I felt empty. Not because I had won, but because I knew this was just the beginning. They had signed the papers, but that didn't mean things were fixed. It didn't mean they would suddenly see me for who I was. But it was a start. And for the first time, wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. I wasn't holding my breath anymore. I had finally taken control of my life. And for now, that was enough. 6 months had passed since that day, the day I finally took control of my life, the day I stopped being invisible. Life had unfolded in ways I hadn't expected, though some things had stayed the same. I still had my apartment, still lived alone, still walked into each day with a sense of purpose. But there was a new kind of peace inside me now, something I hadn't felt before, something lighter. Ava was sitting on the couch, reading a book as I came through the door. The warm afternoon sun spilling through the windows, casting soft, golden light across the room. She didn't look up, but I didn't need her to. She always knew when something had changed, even without me saying a word. "How's the day?" she asked, her voice soft, as always. She wasn't looking for a detailed report, just a simple answer, a check-in. I could hear the steady hum of the coffee machine in the kitchen, the faint sound of traffic outside, and for once, the world outside didn't feel overwhelming. "Quiet," I replied, dropping my bag on the table and kicking off my shoes. I sat next to her on the couch, leaning back, letting the silence settle comfortably between us. Ava looked up from her book and smiled. She didn't need to ask about the family, about the papers, about the agreement. She had been there through it all. She knew how hard it had been. But she also knew that, for the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight anymore. Not for them, not for anyone. "You seem lighter," she said, the words spoken with the same gentleness she always used when she noticed some small but significant. I nodded, letting her words settle over me. She was right, I was lighter. I wasn't holding my breath anymore, waiting for validation, for recognition, for someone else to see me. I had seen myself, and that was enough. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and saw my mother's name. A part of me hesitated. It had been months since we'd spoken beyond the necessary exchanges about payments, about the contract. But it wasn't just about the money anymore, was it? I picked up the phone. "Hello, Carenza," my mother said, her voice strained. "It's time for the next therapy session. We're ready. We've been talking, and we're ready to do this. All of us." I sat back on the couch, the words hanging in the air. The acknowledgement had come slowly, but it had come. They were ready. It wasn't just about the loan anymore. It wasn't just about paying back the money they owed. It was about understanding, about healing, about finally seeing each other for who we really were, not as roles to be played, but as people. "I'll be there," I said, my voice steady. But I could feel a knot in my chest unraveling, loosening. There was a weight lifting. This wasn't just about family therapy anymore. This was about them seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time. And it wasn't about guilt. It wasn't about expectation. It was about understanding. I hung up the phone, the quiet settling back into the room. Ava looked at me, her expression calm, waiting. "They're ready?" I said, the words feeling strange but freeing. It was a moment I had never expected. The moment when they finally acknowledged what I had known for so long, the imbalance, the favoritism, the unspoken hierarchy. They were finally ready to do the work. Ava nodded, her hand finding mine. She didn't need to say anything. She had been there every step of the way. She knew how hard it had been, but she also knew that I had done it. I had taken the hardest step of all. I had chosen myself. And now, I could finally start living. That evening, I sat down at the table, surrounded by the papers once again, the loan agreement, the terms, the documents that had once felt like a heavy burden. But now, they were nothing more than paperwork, reminders of a time I was ready to move past. The changes hadn't happened overnight and they hadn't been easy. But they had happened. Laya and Noah had followed through. The payments were on time, every month, without fail. They had taken the financial counseling seriously. They had learned to manage their own lives, without expecting me to step in and fix everything. My parents, too, had started to change, though their progress was slower. They hadn't fully let go of their old patterns, but they were trying. And that was enough. I thought about the family therapy sessions we'd had. The first one had been hard, full of painful admissions and uncomfortable silences, but it had also been the first time in my life that my parents had truly seen me. They had listened. They had acknowledged their mistakes. And for the first time, I had seen them as people too, not just as parents, but as flawed individuals, trying to make up for the things they had never known how to give. When I went to the next family gathering, it was different. My parents had finally spoken up. They had addressed the favoritism, the emotional neglect, and the years of unspoken assumptions. They apologized, and I could finally breathe. Ava and I had built something together, a life that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations, a life where I didn't have to shrink to fit a role. We spent slow Sundays exploring neighborhoods, talking about the future without comparing it to anyone else's. The weight that had once settled in my chest, the weight of always being last, was gone. And in its place was a quiet sense of peace, the kind that comes from knowing you are finally living your life, not someone else's. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But I had learned something important, something I never would have understood if I hadn't gone through all of it. I had learned that I was enough, that I didn't have to be the fixer, that I didn't have to carry their weight anymore. And for the first time, I was free,